I'm going to do something a little bit different today. We're not going to investigate and debunk an entire video line for line. However, what we are going to do is debunk somebody's scientific rigor. This gentleman on YouTube has a video discussing his statistical probability analysis of the likelihood of God's existence based on some numbers or something in the Bible. So let's go take a look at it. Let's take a look at his initial claim, and he invites us to do a little peer review on it. So I'm going to present this video as a peer review.
Carl Sagan once said, "Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence." Well, my atheist and agnostic friends, here is the proof you have asked for. The probability analysis that what I present is wrong or by chance range from on the low end in the order of magnitude of 1 in 10 to the 35th power, and on the higher, when including verifiable variables, in the order of 1 in 10 to the 134th. I'm going to keep this as concise as possible. Just because I don't include something here, that doesn't mean I haven't considered it. I've spent 20 years attempting to consider every falsifiable counterargument possible. At the end of my last two videos addressing atheism, I presented what I said was proof of God. Now, through the assistance of AI, I was able to verify my results. So here we go. In 2007, I noticed an alignment of intervals in Daniel. It looks like this. Now I know you're going to say, well, why in such order? That's interpretive. Well, I'm going to show that it doesn't matter what order these are in, nor if you put them in any order whatsoever, it's not going to matter. That 1 in 10 to the 33rd probability of chance is when approaching this calculation in that manner. Then in 2013, I noticed these holy days lined up with these intervals in some years and coincided not only with the descriptions of the intervals in Daniel, but also their precise intervals. And again, my interpretation isn't needed, nor any descriptions of the intervals in Daniel. What I'm going to show you is it doesn't matter what I interpret, or even that of Daniel. Then, in 2018, I discovered that all of the remaining intervals in holy days line up only one time in the span of 2,000 years. And that is 2028 to 2035. I have subsequently determined this alignment does not occur again within a 6,000 year period, but moving forward here, I'm only going to use the 2,000 year period because that is the timeline that I had verified by hand. I do not include any holy days that are said to be fulfilled by Jesus in the first century, that of Passover, Feast of Unleavened Bread, First Fruits, and Pentecost. As well, it can be noted, those were also backed by intervals. So I said in my two books, The Final Kingdom and The Capstone, I knew the odds of what I had discovered was proof of God's existence. I just couldn't prove it until now. I've run every statistical analysis possible. And what I'm going to do here is open up these findings to peer review. I invite anyone to find a fault, a crack.
The presenter claims to have found statistical proof of God and clearly invites peer review, so today I'm going to take him up on that offer. We'll walk through the main claims as if he were submitting this to an academic paper. Let's see how well this holds up to the actual peer review process. Spoilers, it doesn't.
Here we have my website, and that can be found at e-jw.org. And I'm going to start at this post. Name of the thread is called Proof of God. I'll leave a link down below so that you can verify and read this for yourself. I add all the variables at the top, and I slowly start removing all of the variables down to their constituent, very basic of processes to verify the odds of chance.
The presenter's central claim here is elusive. Rather than stating a clear testable hypothesis, he meanders through a narrative involving prophetic intervals from the Book of Daniel and various Jewish holy days, which he claims align perfectly during a 7-year period from 2028 to 2035. According to him, this rare alignment only occurs once every 2,000 years, and that statistical rarity is taken as evidence of divine intent. However, this claim is neither consistently defined nor rigorously defended. Is he attempting to demonstrate that a specific calendar alignment exists, asserting that this alignment is so rare that it cannot be coincidence or the result of cherry-picking? Or is this an outright claim on its own merits that this is a standalone proof for God's existence? These are vastly different conclusions, each requiring different standards of evidence, and he slides between them without ever acknowledging the leap. Worse, the claim appears to evolve throughout his video and forum posts. He moves from interesting pattern to statistical impossibility to undeniable divine signature without providing a clear logical or methodological bridge between these conclusions. There are several flaws in his claim, the first being ambiguity. He has no clearly stated hypothesis. The video waffles between data discovery and theological assertion. He makes a category error. He treats the existence of pattern as the equivalent to evidence of divine causation, and he moves the goalposts. He introduces new layers such as AI validation, theistic vertiocentrism, etc., not to clarify, but to reinforce belief post hoc. He never says exactly what he's proving, and that ambiguity can lead to wildly different claims. The question, does this sequence of dates line up, is a math question. The other question, are these dates arranged by a divine hand, is a metaphysical one. Right now, he's trying to answer the second one using flawed methods that don't even answer the first. This isn't a hypothesis. This is a non-falsifiable belief system with dates and numbers. If peer review demands clarity, his argument doesn't even get past the title page.
So here was my question: does this sequence occur again within 1,000 years from now? And this is the Sarah B'Tevet, and then the Jewish holiday, and then the discussion of the time difference. Now, these intervals are discussed in Scripture. So like 2,520 days is taken from Daniel chapter 4 of 7 times. The 2,300 days is taken from Daniel chapter 8. These 1335, 1290, 1260 are taken from Daniel chapter 12. 1260 you can also find in Daniel chapter 7, Revelation chapter 11, Revelation chapter 12. 430 days taken for Ezekiel chapter 4. And 450 days here is taken from Daniel chapter 7. And so these are set as you see them. However, we'll get into why they're in this order. And in fact, just to give you a little heads up, it doesn't even matter what order they're in.
The methodology presented, if we can even call it that, is fundamentally flawed. It's a patchwork of scriptural references, subjective interpretations of calendar events, and AI output that is never meaningfully validated or contextualized. Specific prompts are never given, and there is significant evidence of the presenter hiding his exact prompts laced throughout his forum post. This entire analysis is built on an unstable foundation of prophetic numerology, cherry-picked data, and untested assumptions. There are several key methodological flaws. First, he uses prophetic intervals with no empirical basis. The presenter selects intervals from various books of the Bible, 1260, 1290, 1335 days, etc., treating them as fixed objective units of measurement. These are symbolic durations from religious texts, not points of data derived from observation, and he provides no justification for treating them as literal or applicable across thousands of years of calendar history. You can't base statistical analysis on a number given in a dream recorded thousands of years ago and treat it like it's a stopwatch, especially when you haven't even established that the recorded dream actually happened and isn't just some made-up fairy tale. He cherry-picks his holy days. Only certain holy days are selected, specifically those not fulfilled by Jesus, as the presenter states. This is explicitly stated, meaning religious doctrine is directly filtering out the dataset. That alone invalidates the neutrality of the analysis. If you're handpicking dates based on religious preconceptions, you're not running an experiment, you're writing a sermon. He has undefined variables and different thresholds. Key components like what counts as an alignment, how close two dates need to be, or what qualifies as a match are never defined. There's no explanation of the acceptable margin of error, nor how multiple alignments may be weighted. This makes the entire analysis non-reproducible. If you don't define your terms, you cannot measure your results, full stop. There's no null hypothesis or control. There's no attempt to run the same analysis on random intervals, alternative calendars, or other multi-year windows. The absence of a control or null hypothesis makes it impossible to assess whether observed pattern is unique, actually statistically significant, or simply an artifact of the filtering process. This is like finding a weird shape in one cloud and calling it a miracle without ever looking up again. He has a post hoc window selection. The presenter chooses a 2,000-year window after discovering the alignment rather than defining that window before the analysis. He briefly mentioned the same alignment doesn't occur in 6,000 years, but limits the scope anyway because the 2,000-year frame supports his conclusion. This is a textbook case of the Texas sharpshooter fallacy. The differences in data are ignored, but the similarities are overemphasized. He shot the side of a barn, then drew a bullseye around the bullet hole. Why 2,000 years? Why not 6,000 years, as the presenter himself mentioned? Why not all of recorded history? Simply put, it's because 2,000 years gives him the answer he wants. The methodology here isn't a methodology, it's a narrative scaffold. Intervals picked for a symbolic value, holy days filtered for theological compatibility, and a date range chosen after the fact to maximize impact. There's no control group, no baseline, no hypothesis to falsify. It's just an attempt to make scripture sound like statistics.
The Hebrew dates get converted into Gregorian dates just for counting the intervals. And of course I did this by hand. Grok 3 had difficulty with the conversions. It couldn't track the Chesvan and Kisloff variants. I gave it 4 false positives before I got tired of checking its work. However, chatgpt was much more able to handle the conversions. It did it in a process where it checked for tentative, a single date, going out thousands of years, and then it was able to find that date and calculate the intervals in between to determine if there were any other time periods in which these intervals occurred. So it was much easier able to handle that process.
Now, at the heart of any scientific or data-driven analysis is a basic expectation. The tools used must be stable, transparent, and consistent. In the case of the presenter's work, the opposite is true. His use of AI, specifically switching between Grok 3 and chatgpt, and possibly other unnamed tools, introduces a methodological black hole. There are some key failures in his tool use. First, he has some unexplained model switching happening. The presenter switches between Grok 3 and chatgpt for different stages of analysis, i.e. the Gregorian Hebrew date conversion, interval checking, probability analysis, without controlling for variation in behavior, explaining how data integrity was maintained across models, noting which specific versions of each model was used, and explaining why the switch itself occurred beyond a vague complaint of Grok 3 giving false positives. Imagine you were conducting a chemistry experiment, switched measurement devices halfway through, and never recorded how each tool was used to make a measurement. That's what's happening here. There's no prompt transparency. The presenter fails to share his full prompt, at least on the first forum post. We have no way of knowing how his question was formed, whether leading language was used, if theology-related keywords like divine, prophecy, or theistic vertiocentrism were injected up front, skewing the AI output to align with that prompt. This lack of transparency makes his entire interaction with the AI models non-auditable. We cannot see the inputs, we cannot trust the outputs. I will return to this point momentarily. In any scientific context, undocumented inputs means invalid results. There's an indication of cherry-picked outputs here. Given the absence of a fully transparent initial prompt and the improbably aligned theological conclusions output by Grok 3, statements like, the probability indicates a high likelihood of intentional design aligning with theistic vertiocentrism, it is highly likely that the presenter repeated prompts until he got the result he wanted, confirmation bias, possibly edited or fabricated sections of the output to support his narrative, or prompted Grok 3 to specifically come to a conclusion about intentional design and theistic vertiocentrism, which is lacking full transparency. Additionally, the presenter nor Grok 3 expands on the conclusion. Is the Grok 3 output meant to claim support for something like intelligent design, or is it merely stating that the probability of the statistical calculations indicated that this conclusion aligns with whatever theistic vertiocentrism is? I asked both ChatGPT and Grok 3 to clarify what theistic vertiocentrism might be, but neither one of them could give me a standard definition. As such, I must conclude that the AI was prompted with a definition of theistic vertiocentrism in order to come to this conclusion. When AI starts to make unsolicited theological claims, either the AI is trained specifically to make theological conclusions, or it was prompted to. These are not conclusions models like ChatGPT and Grok 3 normally come to without heavy engineering. There's also evidence of fabricated language. The phrase theistic vertiocentrism appears out of nowhere in the Grok 3 output. This term has no recognized standing in theology or philosophy, cannot be found in any credible academic database, search engine, formal epistemological framework, or even in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Yes, I went digging. This points to either a completely fabricated output, prompt injection, or user-defined internal model command. Regardless of how this phrase got there, its presence proves the response was not organically generated from the AI's own reasoning model or training data. You do not get obscure philosophical conclusions from a statistical prompt unless you primed the system to deliver it. This is dishonest, and no reputable peer-reviewed journal in the sciences would accept an analysis with undisclosed inputs and unverifiable outputs. In short, this entire process lacks any semblance of integrity. The presenter treats AI outputs as divine revelation while hiding the inputs that shape them. He switches models without documenting the consequences. He presents highly questionable text as spontaneous insight, and he never allows the audience to fully audit the process in an honest, transparent way. The presenter claims AI verifies his findings, but there's a big problem. He switched tools mid-analysis, doesn't show his prompts, and provides output that sounds less like an algorithm and more like a Sunday sermon. In real research, that's called tampering. Here, it's passed off as divine confirmation, but if you can't reproduce the results, verify the input data, or explain the entire tool chain and how it was used, you're not doing science. You're just playing theological Mad Libs with an LLM. So what is theistic vertiocentrism? Well, it appears to be a completely imagined term fabricated by the presenter to specifically give credibility to his numerology. It is not a phrase found in any academic literature, philosophical database, or theological framework. As far as I can tell, theistic vertiocentrism means something close to a worldview centered around divine truth. Theistic, likely related to the belief in a god or gods. In this case, as the presenter is a Jehovah's Witness, the monotheistic God of the Bible. Vertio, likely derived from the Latin veritas, meaning truth. And centrism, centered on or oriented on something. Of course, I can't verify that because this is just etymological reconstruction. It has no established academic definition, no presence in theology, apologetics, or epistemology, no citations in philosophy databases, JSTOR, or Google Scholar, no appearance in AI or probability theory context of both ChatGPT and Grok 3. This is dishonest semantic laundering. The presenter has invented a term that sounds rigorous and slapped it into his conclusion, or rather prompted Grok 3 to come up to a conclusion about it, and hopes the academic tone of the phrase will mask it as having some higher order meaning and substance. This is particularly problematic when used with AI outputs, as this can create the illusion that the AI has independently affirmed the theological conclusion when it has done no such thing other than to regurgitate what it was prompted with. This can also be considered circular reasoning. The presenter injects this phrase into his LLM prompt. He implies, but never outright states, that Grok 3 independently concluded it. This falsely makes the conclusion seem externally validated rather than self-reinforcing. This is an intellectual sleight of hand. Invent a phrase that sounds scholarly, feed it into an AI, then act amazed when the AI gives it back to you. This is the theological equivalent of a deepfake. It doesn't exist outside of the presenter's bubble and is likely being used to push his ideology.
Conclusion: the odds of the holy days assigning with the intervals in the timeline without any descriptions influence, of course, 10 to the 35th. Extremely low alignment, highly unlikely chances, objective indicating significant likelihood of intentional design. The probability analysis that what I present is wrong or by chance range from on the low end in the order of magnitude of 1 in 10 to the 35th power, and on the higher, when including verifiable variables, in the order of 1 in 10 to the 134th.
The presenter relies on large, intimidating numbers such as 1 in 10 to the 35 or 1 in 10 to the 167 to give his argument the illusion of mathematical rigor. But upon closer inspection, these numbers are completely ungrounded, methodologically incoherent, and logically irrelevant to the claim of divine causation. Here are some key failures. First, there are some unsubstantiated probability claims. The presenter makes frequent use of astronomical odds, but provides no formula, no distribution, no sample space, no explanation of independence or dependence between events. These values appear to be pulled out of nowhere, or more precisely, pulled from an AI model asked to evaluate a predefined scenario. Big numbers without proper methodology is just numerology on a TI-83 calculator. This is also a misuse of AI-generated probabilities. In one of the most misleading parts of his presentation, the presenter cites Grok 3's generated output. The odds of 1 in 2.56 times 10 to the power of 35 suggest that the alignment of these intervals with holy days in 2028 to 2035 is extremely unlikely to occur by chance. This completely misrepresents how LLMs like Grok 3 and chatgpt function. They do not compute probabilities using empirical data unless the user supplies external statistical code or connects the AI to a genuine probability module, which he doesn't show. The model merely produces probability-sounding text. They generate plausible-sounding values based on language patterns, not rigorous mathematical inference. Worse still, Grok 3 is analyzing a predefined non-random structure. It's not being asked to evaluate whether a random process could generate a result. It's being asked to look at a fixed hand-selected sequence and comment on how rare it is. This is not the discovery of a rare pattern. This is simply confirmation that the user defined a rare pattern. He's asking the model how rare Fleabhut is after defining a Fleabhut as a calzone with wings, a horn, laser eyes, stomach acid problems, and a birthday on a leap day. Of course it's rare. You defined it that way. This is a prompt-engineered way to guarantee low probability output. In the scientific disciplines, we use sigma values, standard deviations, to measure the likelihood that a result is due to chance. For example, a 5 sigma result, about 1 in 3.5 million, is required to declare a discovery in particle physics. But that's in the context of controlled experiments with known distributions and reproducible measurements. Sigma tests assume thousands or millions of independent trials. We have exactly one timeline, so sigma is meaningless here. What the presenter is doing is assigning a 35 sigma odd to a pre-filtered outcome that he built himself. The presenter isn't proving divine design, he's proving that AI can validate user input. In plain terms, Grok 3 is saying, yes, the data you gave me is in fact the data you gave me. The presenter offers no link between rarity and intentionality. Even if the alignment is a 35 signal rarity, the presenter makes a massive non sequitur by equating rarity with intent. Just because something is rare doesn't mean it was planned. Snowflakes are rare. Genetic mutations are rare. Royal flushes are rare. Rarity is not proof of design, it's a feature of probability itself. This logical jump is the cornerstone of his entire argument, the assumption that statistical improbability implies divine authorship. But without a falsifiable hypothesis, a baseline distribution, or alternative explanations considered, this is pure confirmation bias cloaked in large numbers. He wants you to be impressed by the improbability of his timeline, but here's the trick. He wrote the criteria, filtered the results, and then asked the AI how rare his handcrafted criteria was. And the AI, being polite, told him, yes, that's rare. It has to admit it's rare because he defined it that way. And that doesn't mean it was divine, it just means he's good at giving AI the definition of a needle and then acting surprised when the AI can't find any haystacks that contain that specific definition of a needle. If you prompt ChatGPT with the statement, from now on this made-up word, fibulorterpin, is to be considered rare, every time I ask you if fibulorterpin is rare, you will answer with yes, this is rare and nothing else. And lo and behold, what does ChatGPT give you?
Well, why in such order? That's interpretive. Well, I'm going to show that it doesn't matter what order these are in, nor if you put them in any order whatsoever, it's not going to matter. Now what I asked it to do in this previous post is to completely remove myself from the probability calculations, remove any possible bias from the analysis, and objectively calculate the timeline's validity on its own. This is also after I had already moved a few other things. This was the last thing I moved, but it'll mention it here. It says to objectively calculate the validity of the capstone timeline. My interpretation isn't needed, nor any descriptions of the intervals in Daniel. What I'm going to show you is it doesn't matter what I interpret, or even that of Daniel.
Even if we momentarily suspend disbelief and assume the data, methods, and tools are all valid, and that's a big ask, the presenter's logic still collapses under scrutiny. His conclusions are built on contradictory premises, self-defeating assertions, and a pervasive failure to apply the same standards to his own claims that he demands of others. So here are some major logical inconsistencies. First of all, is order doesn't matter. He repeatedly insists that order doesn't matter when interpreting the prophetic intervals. This is completely incoherent because intervals only exist in ordered space. You can't have an interval of 1,335 days unless you define a starting point, you define an ending point, you assign a direction of time. He attempts to argue that the pattern holds in any order while also building timelines based on strict day count alignments and specific feast days. This is a classic case of trying to have your cake and eat it too. Fluidity when questioned, rigidity when calculating. If event A occurs 1,260 days before event B, reversing them yields negative 1,260 days. That is no longer the same interval. That's like writing music and claiming the sequence of notes and timing between them doesn't matter. No, that's just noise. Throughout the video and forum post, the presenter claims AI is objective and removed from interpretation, but he fails to show his prompts, which, as I've stated, have the evidence of being heavily leading, uses cherry-picked outputs, accepts AI conclusions only when they align with his theology, injects invented terminology, theistic vertiocentrism, into the conversation, then acts as if the AI discovered it independently. Sure, an engine is mechanically objective, but if you jam the stick shift from first into fifth without a clutch, you're not using it correctly, you're abusing the tool. That's exactly what the presenter is doing with AI here. no interpretation needed? The presenter claims his interpretation isn't needed, but this is demonstrably false. His entire analysis requires interpretation every step of the way, selecting prophetic intervals, filtering specific holy days, choosing a 2,000-year window, deciding what qualifies as alignment, assigning theological meaning to overlapping dates. By claiming neutrality while making subjective choices at every turn, he evades accountability and insulates himself from criticism. You can't say you're interpreting anything while choosing which parts of the Bible to count, which dates matter, and which outcomes are meaningful. That's not neutral, that's narrative control. He's also shifting the burden of interpretation. There's a rhetorical trick repeated throughout this video. He says, it doesn't matter what I think, or this works even without my views, but then builds a probability model that only makes sense if you accept his views. This leads to invisible assumptions baked into every output, which created a closed-loop argument. It's not my interpretation, it's just the way the numbers work, but the numbers were chosen because of the interpretation. He wants you to believe this is just math without theology or interpretation, but the moment you ask where the numbers came from, where the dates came from, or why these specific intervals matter, suddenly the math evaporates and the belief system comes into view. You can't build a theological timeline, then act shocked when it smells like theology. After examining the data, methodology, toolchain, statistical reasoning, and logical structure of the presenter's video and forum post, we arrive at a clear, evidence-based conclusion. This is not proof of a god or even of divinity. This is a feedback loop of belief masquerading as statistical analysis. This does not prove divine intent. This does not prove supernatural design. This does not provide new empirical insight or testable hypotheses. There is no causal evidence linking the observed calendar alignments to any metaphysical force. There is no falsifiable framework. There is no control group. There is only a highly constrained data set filtered through a theological lens, then presented independently from an AI model. Here's what it does prove. If you prompt an AI the right way, it will agree with you. Language models reflect your framing. If you ask a loaded question, they will give you a loaded answer. Your outputs reflect your inputs. The alignments were predefined, the intervals pre-chosen, and the date range selected to generate a specific desired rarity. The AI is merely confirming that your constructed timeline matches your constructed criteria. This isn't discovery. This is confirmation bias scripted into an LLM prompt. AI does not verify your belief. It echoes them. No matter how objective the tool appears or how much you prompt it to remain neutral, an LLM's neutrality ends where your prompt begins. The presenters claim that AI confirmed my timeline is meaningless if the prompts were framed to demand that confirmation. The presenter's own post gave the game away. Grok 3's unsolicited use of the phrase theistic vertiocentrism, a term that does not appear in academic theology, exposes how deeply the presenter's belief system is embedded into the hidden initial prompt. No neutral AI would arrive at that phrase unprompted. It is a fingerprint, a tell, a dead giveaway, a confession in code. This wasn't peer-reviewed research. This was a theological Rube Goldberg machine powered by selective prompts and dressed up in probabilities. It doesn't prove that God designed a 7-year calendar cycle. It proves that if you feed your beliefs into an AI and ask it to agree with you, it will. No amount of prompt scrubbing will hide that, because the system said the quiet part out loud. It mirrored the presenter's inputs, which means the only thing this experiment confirmed was the presenter's own bias. This wasn't divine proof, it was divine projection, fed into a language model and echoed back with math-flavored glitter. That's all for this episode. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give me a like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. If you can, maybe buy me a coffee and join the Discord channel as I try to build up our community. Bye!